A silent forest in central Vietnam hides towers built by a lost world. These weathered brick structures are all that remains of the Champa kingdom, a powerful Hindu empire that ruled these coasts for over 1,000 years. By the end of this journey, you will understand how a forgotten civilization used sacred geometry and divine kingship to build a reality that rivaled the Great Khmer and Vietnamese empires. We will explore why their temples were aligned with the stars and how their goddess still commands worship today. What does it mean for a culture to vanish, yet leave its spirit etched so deeply into the land? This empire did not rise in isolation, but on a stage set by geography and time. For over 1,500 years, the Cham people held a slender but vital ribbon of coastline, stretching from what is now central Vietnam down to the lush Mekong Delta in the south. Their world was defined by the sea to the east and the formidable Annamite mountain range to the west, a natural barrier that shaped their destiny. This was not a single, unchanging kingdom, but a network of powerful city-states, often united under a common culture and religion, yet sometimes competing with one another. Their timeline is immense, beginning to coalesce around the 2nd century after Christ, and enduring in various forms until the final vestiges of Cham political independence were absorbed by the Vietnamese in the early 19th century. To understand their power, you must see them not as a landlocked empire, but as masters of the water. They occupied the central node of the maritime Silk Road, that ancient superhighway of ships carrying spices, silks, gems, and ideas. A Cham port was a place where Indian merchants, Chinese envoys, and Javanese sailors would all mingle. This constant flow of goods and people made Champa a profoundly cosmopolitan society, a sponge that absorbed cultural influences and then transformed them into something uniquely its own. The kingdom's heart shifted over the centuries, moving between illustrious capitals. One of the most significant was Indrapura, located in the modern Quang Nam province, a region dense with some of their earliest and most magnificent temple complexes. Later, the center of gravity moved south to Vijaya, in what is now Binh Dinh province, a powerhouse that withstood enormous pressures for centuries. Their story is ultimately one of resilience against an irresistible tide. To the north, the Vietnamese kingdom of Dai Viet, centered on the Red River Delta, began a long, slow march southward, a historical process known as Nam Tine, or the March to the South. This was not always a story of outright conquest, but often of gradual settlement, intermarriage, and shifting borders under immense demographic pressure. The Cham kingdoms contracted, sometimes fought back fiercely, sometimes formed alliances, but were gradually absorbed, yet to frame this solely as a disappearance is to miss the deeper truth. It is a story of a culture bending, adapting, and embedding its spirit so deeply into the land that even conquest could not erase its echo. How does a civilization facing such a tide choose to assert its identity, to shout its presence to the gods and the future? They built in brick and stone, aligning their sacred spaces with the very cosmos. Their power was proclaimed not just in politics and trade, but in stone and faith. At the spiritual core of the Champa civilization stood a dynamic, syncretic pantheon, a fascinating blend of classical Hindu traditions and deeply local beliefs. While they revered the great gods of the Indian subcontinent, they shaped them into a distinctly Cham expression of the divine. Foremost among these was Shiva, the destroyer and regenerator, the lord of the cosmic dance. In Cham temples, Shiva was most commonly worshipped not in a humanoid statue, but through the linga, a smooth, cylindrical stone emblem representing his boundless, creative energy. These lingas, often set upon a square base called a yoni, were the focal point of temple sanctums, objects of profound meditation and royal devotion. It was through the king, seen as a living link to Shiva, that divine order was maintained on earth. Alongside Shiva, the preserver god Vishnu also held a significant place, with several beautiful sculptures and inscriptions dedicated to him, showcasing the kingdom's theological breadth. But perhaps the most telling figure in the Cham spiritual landscape is one you will not find in the standard Hindu canon of India. This is the goddess Po Nagar, the mother of the kingdom. She began as a local deity of the earth and fertility, a protectress of the land and its people. As Hindu influence grew, she was seamlessly assimilated, not replaced. She became identified with the great goddesses Durga, the warrior, and Uma, the gentle consort of Shiva. Yet she never lost her unique Cham identity. Her most magnificent temple complex, perched on a riverbank near modern Nha Trang, stands as a testament to her enduring power. The towers there, though bearing the architectural language of Hindu cosmology, were built for her. And here lies the extraordinary continuity. For centuries after the political fall of Champa, this site has never ceased to be a place of active worship. Today, Vietnamese Buddhists and followers of folk religion come to light incense and offer prayers to Thien Hoa Na, the Vietnamese name for the same goddess. The rituals, the flowers, the smoke of incense, all echo practices that would be deeply familiar to a Cham devotee from 1,000 years ago. This is not merely a historical ruin, it is a living layer of spirituality, where ancient Cham earth magic blends with Hindu mythology and modern Vietnamese belief. What does it mean for a goddess to outlast the kingdom that built her temples? She becomes something more permanent than empire, a thread of devotion woven directly into the soul of the landscape itself. The language of their devotion was written in brick and fire. Across the coastal plains and river valleys, the Cham people raised their most enduring statements of faith, the Kalan, those iconic brick tower temples that still claw at the sky. To stand before one, like the magnificent clusters at my Sun or the solitary grandeur of Po Nagar, is to witness an architectural alchemy. They transformed earth and water into structures meant to bridge the human and the divine. Each tower is a meticulously coded universe. Its form is a representation of Mount Meru, the mythical Axis Mundi, the cosmic mountain at the center of all creation in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. By building these microcosms, the Cham kings were not just constructing places of worship. They were literally anchoring the order of the cosmos within their kingdom, stabilizing reality itself from their sacred centers. The construction itself is a profound mystery that modern engineers still struggle to fully explain. These soaring towers, some standing over 25 meters tall, were built with precisely fired bricks, but with no visible mortar binding them together. The joints are so impossibly tight that, even after 1,000 years of tropical storms and encroaching jungle, you often cannot slide a blade of grass between the bricks. This suggests a lost technological secret, a kind of sacred chemistry. The prevailing theory is that the builders used an organic adhesive, perhaps a plant-based resin or a slurry made from tree sap, which was applied to the bricks before firing. Once heated, this substance would have fused the bricks into a nearly monolithic whole, a stone-like mass born from clay and flame. This was not mere engineering, it was a ritual act, a transformation of base materials into a permanent home for the gods. The sandstone that crowns these structures tells another story. While the brick bodies represent the earthly realm and the arduous path to the divine, the sandstone doorways, lintels, and decorative elements are bursts of intricate narrative. Here, master carvers brought the mythology to life. You might see the serene face of a bodhisattva, the fierce dance of Shiva, or the gentle curves of apsaras, celestial dancers. These carvings were not just decoration, they were visual scriptures, instructing devotees and marking the temple as a threshold to a higher plane of understanding. Perhaps most intriguing are the celestial alignments. Many scholars believe these temples were oriented with precise astronomical knowledge. Certain doorways or central axes may have been designed to capture the rays of the solstice sun, illuminating the inner sanctum and its sacred linga on the most potent days of the solar year. This marriage of sacred geometry and cosmic observation points to a deep, esoteric knowledge. The temple was a machine for harmony, aligning the king's rule with the gods above and the cyclical patterns of the stars. It was a permanent prayer, built to outlast dynasties, ensuring that even if the kingdom fell, its sacred alignment with the universe would remain, waiting to be rediscovered. What happens when the civilization that built these cosmic anchors retreats from history? The towers remain, but their original guardians and rituals fade, leaving behind a potent silence filled with unanswered questions. Deep in a secluded valley ringed by the Cat's Tooth Mountains, the Cham people built their most sacred city. This is my son, a name that translates simply to beautiful mountain, but this place was far more than a scenic retreat. For over 1,000 years, from roughly the 4th to the 13th centuries, this valley served as the spiritual and political heart of the Champa kingdom, its equivalent to a holy capital. Unlike a single, towering cathedral, my son was a sprawling ritual landscape, a constellation of over 70 temples grouped into 10 distinct clusters. Each cluster was a world unto itself, built by successive kings and dedicated to specific deities or royal ancestors, creating a physical timeline of dynastic devotion etched in brick. The choice of this valley was no accident. Encircled by protective, jungle-clad peaks, it was seen as a natural mandala, a consecrated bowl where the energy of the earth met the gaze of the heavens. Entering this space was to step into a diagram of the cosmos, designed to align the kingdom's fate with the eternal rhythms of the universe. Walking through the ruins today, you can still trace the logic of its sacred geometry. The clusters, labeled simply by archaeologists as Group A, Group B, and so on, each had a central tower, the Kalan, surrounded by smaller auxiliary towers, gatehouses, and long meditation halls. The primary cluster, Group B, was dedicated to Bhadrashvara, a unique Cham deity combining the god Shiva with the name of an early king, a direct fusion of royal and divine authority. Here, the king was not just a ruler, he was a high priest, performing elaborate rituals within these brick chambers to renew his sacred mandate. The carvings that adorn the surviving sandstone elements tell silent, eloquent stories. You will find the serene, meditative face of Shiva and the guardian Devarapalas standing watch at doorways, their expressions holding a timeless vigilance. But look closer at the lintels above the entrances. Here, the mythical Makara often appears, a sea creature with the body of a crocodile, the trunk of an elephant, and the tail of a peacock. This was no mere monster. It was a symbol of life-giving water, of fertility, and a protector against evil, its gaping mouth often forming the architectural frame from which deities would emerge. And then there are the celestial dancers, the apsaras. Carved in graceful relief on the brick walls, they seem to float in an eternal performance. With their delicate features, ornate jewelry, and fluid, bending postures, they represent the ultimate ideal of divine beauty and harmony. They are not just decorations, they are visual hymns. In Hindu cosmology, these dancers inhabit the heavens, entertaining the gods with their art. By placing them on the temple walls, the builders were bringing that celestial music down to earth, filling the sacred space with an echo of paradise. The entire complex functioned as a vast, open-air machine for spiritual power. Scholars believe the layout and orientation of the towers were carefully planned with astronomical events in mind, perhaps so that the sun at the solstice would shine directly down the central axis of a key temple, illuminating the dark sanctum and its sacred linga. This was cosmic engineering. Every ritual performed here, from the coronation of a king to the annual monsoon prayers, was amplified by this precise alignment. The king, standing at the symbolic center of this man-made universe, became the literal pivot point between the earthly realm and the divine order, his rule legitimized not just by bloodline, but by the perceived approval of the stars themselves. My son was where heaven and earth signed a perpetual contract, with the Cham kings as its witnesses and priests. Within the dark, cool sanctum of a Cham tower, the ultimate mystery resided not in a statue, but in a simple, powerful form. At the absolute heart of the temple, in the windowless chamber known as the Garbha Griha, or womb house, sat the Shiva linga upon its yoni base. This was the axis of the universe for the Cham people, a geometric poem of creation itself. The smooth, cylindrical linga, rising from a square or circular base, represents the transcendent, formless principle of pure consciousness, known as Purusha or Shiva. Its base, the yoni, is a trough-like receptacle, representing the dynamic, creative energy of the material world, known as Prakriti or Shakti. Together, they are an inseparable duality, the union from which all of existence perpetually springs forth. This was not an abstract theological idea. It was a living, breathing truth made stone. The linga was the unmoving center, the still point of the turning world, while the yoni was the vessel of manifestation, the source of all life and abundance. To stand before this symbol was to witness the fundamental blueprint of reality, the cosmic marriage of spirit and matter. But this profound spiritual symbol was also the bedrock of earthly power. For a Cham king, his legitimacy flowed directly from this sacred union. One of the most important acts a ruler could perform was the installation of a royal linga in a major temple, often at a site like my sun. These were not generic icons, they were personal and dynastic. A king would frequently combine his own name with that of the god, creating a deity like Bhadrashvara, which fuses the god Shiva, Isvara, with the name of King Bhadravarman. By doing this, the king was performing a breathtaking act of symbolic magic. He was weaving his own soul and his royal authority into the very fabric of the cosmos, declaring that his rule was a direct extension of divine will. The temple housing his linga became more than a place of worship. It was a battery of spiritual power for the entire kingdom, a guarantee of stability, fertility, and protection. The king's duty was to maintain this sacred contract through elaborate rituals. The worship of the linga was a sensory, ceremonial process. While the stone form itself was simple, it was often adorned with exquisite ritual covers called kosha. Crafted from precious metals like gold or silver, these covers would sheath the linga, sometimes shaped into a face of the deity, transforming the abstract symbol into an anthropomorphic focus for devotion. The primary act of worship involved abhisheka, the ritual bathing of the linga. Priests would anoint the sacred stone with a series of consecrated liquids, each carrying its own meaning. Pure water from a sacred river would flow first, for cleansing. Then came milk, a symbol of nourishment and purity, followed by yogurt for prosperity, and finally honey, the essence of sweetness and divine bliss. These liquids would cascade over the linga, down its sides, and collect in the yoni base, visually enacting the cycle of creation, the divine essence flowing into the vessel of the world. The mixture, now considered immensely sanctified, was then distributed to devotees as prasad, a tangible blessing. Through this daily ritual, the abstract cosmic principles were made immediate and accessible. The king, by sponsoring and participating in these rites, positioned himself as the chief intermediary, the one who could channel this divine energy for the benefit of his people. His power was not just military or economic, it was cosmological. He ruled because the universe itself, symbolized by that silent stone in the dark chamber, was understood to flow through him. This raises a haunting question. When the last Cham king performed the last abhisheka, when the flow of milk and honey ceased, what happened to that perceived cosmic link? Did the silence in the sanctum simply mean the ritual had ended, or did it signify something far deeper, a fundamental shift in the reality the kingdom had so carefully constructed? The silent stone dancers on the temple walls were not merely decoration, they were blueprints for a living ritual. In Cham spirituality, art was not a performance for an audience, it was a direct conduit to the divine, a form of sacred technology. The Apsara carvings, with their impossibly graceful postures and serene smiles, depict more than celestial entertainers. They are visual guides, capturing the precise physical forms believed to channel spiritual energy. When a human dancer took the temple courtyard, she was not simply reenacting a myth, she was embodying it, becoming a temporary vessel for that celestial harmony to manifest on earth. Her every movement was a prayer in motion. This was especially true of her hands. The intricate, codified hand gestures known as mudras are a silent language. A turned palm, a curved finger, the joining of thumb and forefinger. Each configuration holds a specific meaning, telling a story, invoking a deity. or symbolizing an element of the cosmos like a lotus blossom or a sheltering mountain. Through these gestures, the dancer wove a narrative in the air, directly communicating with the gods in a way words could not. The dance was never performed in silence. It was propelled by a distinct and hypnotic soundscape, centered on the deep, resonant pulse of the ganang drum. This is not a simple instrument, it is the rhythmic heartbeat of the ritual. Played in sets, their interlocking polyrhythms create a complex, driving pattern that is both grounding and transcendent. The steady, repetitive beat is understood to align the physical space and the participants' own heartbeats with a higher vibrational order. Combined with the chanting of sacred texts and the drone of reed instruments, this music was designed to alter consciousness. It served as an auditory pathway, guiding priests, dancers, and even the king himself from ordinary awareness into a state of heightened spiritual receptivity. A trance where communion with Shiva or the goddess Po Nagar was not just hoped for, but experientially felt. This was the ultimate purpose of the ritual arts, to dissolve the boundary between the human and the divine, if only for the duration of a ceremony. The king, witnessing or participating in this, was at the center of this generated energy, his rule sanctified by the palpable presence of the gods invoked through movement and sound. While the grand temple ceremonies of the empire faded, this esoteric knowledge did not vanish. In a remarkable act of cultural endurance, the Cham people preserved the core of this sacred dance tradition. Passed down through generations, often within families, the graceful movements and precise mudras survived. Today, you can witness performances by Cham communities in Vietnam and the diaspora, where dancers in traditional, ornate costumes bring the stone apsaras back to life. The rhythms of the ganang drums still pound, connecting the present moment to a sacred past. When you see a modern Cham dancer's hands trace a story in the air, you are witnessing more than folklore. You are seeing a living lineage of esoteric practice. It is a direct thread back to those temple courtyards, a sustained belief that the human body, through disciplined art, can still become a bridge to something beyond the mundane world. If the temples are the static, architectural prayers, then the dance is that same prayer given breath and motion, a perpetual rediscovery of the divine within the human form. These silent stones were not meant to remain silent. Scattered across the ruined plinths and door frames of the temples, etched into weathered sandstone steels, are the actual words of the kingdom. These are the Sanskrit and Old Cham inscriptions, and they are far more than simple historical footnotes. They are considered sacred utterances, the permanent voice of the gods and kings, carved into the very bones of the land to echo through eternity. To read them is to hear the empire speak its own truth. The language itself is a profound clue. Sanskrit, the classical tongue of Hindu ritual and philosophy from distant India, was employed for the most formal, the most cosmically significant declarations. Its use was a deliberate act of connecting to a universal, divine order. When a king commissioned an inscription in Sanskrit, he was placing his local rule within a vast, pan-Asian spiritual framework, asserting that his authority was sanctioned by the same cosmic laws that governed ancient Indian empires. Alongside it, written in a unique script derived from Indian Brahmi, are passages in Old Cham. This was the language of the court and the people, used for more practical, but no less sacred matters. The content of these texts reveals the dual nature of Cham kingship, suspended between heaven and earth. Many begin with majestic, poetic invocations to the deities. A stele might open with a hymn to Shiva, describing his terrible beauty in cosmic dance, establishing the divine audience for the words to follow. Then comes the earthly purpose. Royal genealogies are meticulously recorded, tracing a king's lineage back through generations, often to a mythical founder, weaving his mortal life into an unbroken sacred thread. These are not boring lists of names, they are claims to legitimacy written in stone. The most common practical records are dedications of temples and land grants. A king would describe in lavish detail the construction of a new tower for Shiva or the goddess Po Nagar. He would then enumerate the gifts bestowed upon the priests who would maintain the worship, villages, fields, herds of cattle, even servants. This was not mere charity, it was a sacred contract. The king provided material support, and in return, the priests performed the daily rituals that sustain the cosmic order, and, by extension, the king's own power. The land grant inscription acted as a permanent, public deed, witnessed by the gods themselves, ensuring the temple's spiritual work would continue forever. The blending in these texts is fascinating. While the structure and philosophy are deeply Vedic, the concerns are intensely local. An inscription might use classical Sanskrit meter to praise Shiva, and then, in the next passage, specify the exact number of rice paddies along a particular river that are granted to the temple, rice paddies that fed real people in a specific Cham valley. This is where we see the adaptation in action. The grand Indian cosmology of Mount Meru and cosmic oceans was mapped directly onto the Cham landscape. Their local rivers became the sacred Ganges, their temple mountains became the axis of the world, a key discovery that helped historians untangle the complex web of Cham dynasties was the Dong Duong stele, dated to the late 9th century. This long inscription, commissioned by King Indravarman II, is a masterpiece of this synthesis. It records the founding of a major Buddhist monastery, detailing the king's profound personal devotion, while also solidifying his political and religious reforms. Through such texts, we can watch the kingdom's spiritual evolution, seeing the rise and fall of royal cults dedicated to Shiva or Vishnu, or the flourishing of Mahayana Buddhism under certain rulers. Each inscription is a frozen moment of intention, a king speaking across the centuries, trying to secure his legacy in both the material and the spiritual realms. He believed the very act of carving these words into stone, in the sacred language of the gods, made them eternally true. But what happens when the people who can read that sacred language are gone, and the stones are left to the jungle? The voice remains, but for a long, long time, no one was left to hear it. The voice of the stones was never truly lost, for it was kept alive in the memory of a people. The grand empire of Champa may have faded from the political map, but its descendants, the Cham people, endure as a vibrant ethnic minority in Vietnam and Cambodia, carrying forward a spiritual legacy that defies time. Today, they are the living keepers of the flame, the human bridge between those silent brick towers and a living, breathing faith. To understand this continuity, we must recognize the two main spiritual paths within the modern Cham community. The majority are Muslim, known as the Bani Cham, who follow a unique, localized interpretation of Islam that incorporates ancient Cham customs. But our focus turns to the Hindu Cham, known as the Balaman. They are the direct inheritors of the Shivite traditions that once defined the kingdom's royal cults. For them, the ancient temples are not mere archaeological sites. They are active, pulsating centers of worship, and their rituals are a direct transmission from the past. At the heart of this preservation are the priestly lineages, known as the Paise. These are not simply religious leaders chosen by a congregation. They are spiritual specialists, often inheriting their sacred office through family lines, tracing their authority back through generations. A Paise is a guardian of esoteric knowledge, the one who remembers the precise chants in the old Cham language, the intricate steps of the purification rites, and the correct formulas for invoking the deities. He is the living key to the temple's sanctum. When he dons his traditional white robe and turban, he is stepping into a role that would be instantly recognizable to a priest from the age of my son. His most vital duty is to maintain the worship of the sacred linga within the temple towers, performing the ritual baths, or abhisheka, with water, milk, and flowers, just as his ancestors did 1,000 years ago. This is not a historical reenactment. It is the same ritual, performed with the same intent, to sustain the cosmic link between the community and the divine. This living tradition erupts into full, glorious color during the annual Kate Festival, the most important event in the Balaman Cham calendar. Imagine the scene at the magnificent Po Nagar Tower in central Vietnam. The quiet, weathered brick complex, usually brooding under the sun, is suddenly transformed. Hundreds of Cham families gather, dressed in brilliant, hand-woven traditional attire. The air vibrates with the rhythmic, hypnotic pounding of the ganang drums, calling the community together. The festival is a profound act of spiritual homecoming. Its central purpose is to honor the gods, particularly the goddess Po Nagar and the deified king Po Nagar, for whom the tower is named, and to ask for their blessings for the coming year. The Paise priests lead elaborate processions, carrying sacred garments and offerings up the steps to the tower's sanctum. Inside, they perform the ceremonial dressing of the linga, adorning the stone symbol with ornate ritual costumes, transforming the abstract form into a vested deity ready to receive devotion. But Kate is more than a series of priestly rites. It is a complete immersion of the community in its ancestral identity. Elders chant ancient epics, dancers, moving with the same precise, graceful mudras seen on the temple walls, tell the old stories through their bodies. Families share ceremonial foods, strengthening social bonds. Every element, from the music to the clothing to the shared meals, reinforces a collective memory. For the Cham people, the Kate Festival is not about remembering a lost kingdom. It is about celebrating a kingdom that still exists in spirit, one that is renewed each year through devotion. The tower at Po Nagar is not a relic. It is a living participant, its stones warmed by the presence of its people, its sanctum filled once more with the scent of incense and the sound of prayer. In these moments, the centuries collapse. A child watching the dancers today is connected to the child who watched the same dance in the courtyard of a 10th century king. The spiritual technology of alignment, of bridging worlds, never stopped functioning. It simply passed from the hands of emperors into the care of a resilient community. They became the sustainers of the cosmic contract their ancestors forged with the land. Who were the people who built this world? The origins of the Champa civilization are wrapped in a profound historical mystery, one that forces us to question how cultures are born. For decades, the dominant story was one of colonization by a superior culture. This is the classical indigenization theory. It paints a picture of intrepid Hindu traders and Brahmin priests from South India, sailing across the Bay of Bengal around the early centuries after Christ. According to this view, these newcomers arrived on the central Vietnamese coast and found scattered, tribal communities. They then proceeded to bestow upon them the gifts of civilization, a ready-made package including Sanskrit writing, Hindu theology, monumental architecture, and the very concept of kingship. In this narrative, Champa was essentially a splendid offshoot, a copy of Indian models transplanted onto foreign soil. The evidence seemed compelling. The temples looked like Indian shrines, the gods had Indian names, and the royal inscriptions were composed in flawless Sanskrit poetry. It was a tidy explanation that placed India as the sole fountainhead of high culture in ancient Southeast Asia. But over the past 50 years, this narrative has been dramatically overturned by the spade of the archaeologist and the precision of the geneticist. A much richer, more complex story has emerged from the earth itself. Long before the first Indian merchant ship appeared on the horizon, the coast was home to a sophisticated and far-reaching culture known as Sahain. From roughly 1,000 years before Christ to the early centuries after, the Sahain people were master traders and artisans. Their archaeological sites, marked by distinctive jar burial practices, reveal a society with extensive maritime networks, trading precious local goods like iron and glass across the region. They were not passive primitives waiting for enlightenment. They were an established, innovative Austronesian-speaking society, part of the same vast linguistic family that spread from Taiwan to the Philippines, Indonesia, and across the Pacific. The new theory suggests that when Indian ideas finally arrived, they did not land on barren ground. They landed in the bustling ports of a culture that was already complex, confident, and commercially savvy. The adoption of Hinduism and statecraft was not an imposition, but a strategic, selective choice. The Cham elites were engaging in a voluntary, creative dialogue with Indian civilization, taking the pieces that resonated with their own worldview and adapting them into something entirely new. The linguistic evidence is a key clue. While the Cham adopted Sanskrit for sacred, cosmic pronouncements, their everyday language, Old Cham, is firmly rooted in the Austronesian family. It shares far more with the languages of Borneo or the Philippines than with Tamil or Sanskrit. This suggests a local population that learned a new liturgical language for spiritual purposes, but kept its own mother tongue for the business of life, a pattern of adoption, not replacement. Genetics adds another layer. Studies of modern Cham populations show a predominant Southeast Asian ancestry, with a minor, but significant, infusion of South Indian genes. This genetic signature fits the model of contact, intermarriage, and cultural exchange, not a wholesale population replacement. The most telling evidence, however, comes from the temples themselves. While the form is Hindu, the spirit is often deeply local. The worship of the goddess Po Nagar, a local earth deity seamlessly merged with the Hindu goddesses Durga and Uma, is the perfect symbol of this synthesis. The Cham did not simply import Shiva, they reimagined him, placing him at the center of a kingship cult that tied his power directly to their specific landscape and royal lineages. They used Indian bricks and mortar, but to build towers aligned with their own mountains and stars. This was not a case of a foreign blueprint being followed blindly. It was an act of profound cultural alchemy, where a vibrant indigenous civilization reached out, grasped the tools of a great tradition, and used them to build a kingdom that was, in its soul, uniquely and powerfully Cham. Perched on a low hill where the Kai River meets the South China Sea, the towers of Po Nagar command a timeless view. This is not a single temple, but a complex of weathered brick sanctuaries, their silhouettes etched against the sky like stone sentinels. While the site once held as many as 10 towers, 4 primary structures remain, each a testament to a different era of devotion. The tallest and most magnificent is dedicated to the goddess herself, Po Nagar, the mother of the kingdom. Her presence here is ancient, predating even the bricks that now house her spirit. Long before the first tower was raised, this hill was a sacred place for the Cham people, a site of earth worship where the local goddess of fertility and protection was revered. The construction we see today began in the 8th century, but this was not a single act of creation. Like the living faith it serves, Po Nagar was built, damaged by wars and time, and rebuilt again over centuries, each restoration a reaffirmation of belief. The final major renovations occurred in the 11th century, giving the complex the essential form it holds today. This cycle of destruction and renewal is itself a profound symbol. The physical structures could be harmed, but the sacred essence of the place, the numinous energy that drew people here, proved indestructible. It compelled generation after generation to return, to clear the rubble, and to rebuild the home of their goddess. Historically, this was the spiritual heart of the southern Cham kingdom of Kothara. The rituals performed here were of supreme state importance. Priests would have conducted elaborate ceremonies to secure the goddess's blessing for the kingdom, offering precious objects, anointing her image, and chanting petitions for protection, bountiful harvests, and victory. The goddess was seen as the ultimate sovereign, with the earthly king ruling under her mandate. What is extraordinary is that this flow of devotion never ceased. After the political fall of Champa, the site was not abandoned. It was adopted, its spiritual magnetism too powerful to ignore. Today, the complex is a vibrant tapestry of continuous worship that transcends ethnic identity. Ethnic Cham Balaman Hindus still come to perform their ancient rites, led by their Paise priests. They light incense, present offerings of fruit and flowers, and chant in Old Cham before the statue of the goddess, now dressed in traditional silks. In a beautiful act of syncretism, Vietnamese Buddhists and followers of folk religion also flock to the temple. They know the goddess as Thien Hoa Na, a mother goddess who grants wishes and provides comfort. You will see them kneeling in prayer, presenting lavish offerings, and touching the stone in hopes of receiving her blessing. The rituals may vary in detail, but the core intention, the human longing for connection, protection, and grace, remains identical to that of a Cham devotee from 1,000 years ago. The air is perpetually fragrant with incense and the sound of murmured prayers. Po Nagar stands as perhaps the clearest example in all of Southeast Asia of a sacred site, whose power is not bound by the empire that built it. Its energy is older than Hinduism, deeper than any political boundary. It is a wellspring of the numinous that different peoples have simply called by different names. For over a millennium, through the rise and fall of kingdoms, the hill has drawn the faithful like a magnet, proving that while empires are temporary, the places where heaven feels close to earth can be eternal. The wealth that built those temples flowed from the sea. While the kings aligned themselves with the stars, the kingdom's lifeblood was its mastery of trade, a commerce deeply infused with spiritual significance. Champa sat astride the maritime Silk Road, that watery highway connecting China to India, the Middle East, and beyond. Their ports buzzed with a global exchange of goods, but their most famous exports were not mere commodities. They were substances believed to carry the very essence of the sacred. Foremost among these was eaglewood, known to the world as aloeswood. This was not ordinary timber. It forms only when the heartwood of the Aquilaria tree becomes infected with a specific mold, triggering a profound transformation. The tree responds by saturating its core with a dark, fragrant resin. The resulting wood is dense, dark, and when burned, releases an incredibly complex, sweet, and smoky aroma that was considered the scent of the gods. For the Cham, and for cultures across Asia, eaglewood incense was essential for high ritual. Its smoke was seen as a direct conduit for prayers, purifying sacred spaces and carrying devotions heavenward. A Cham priest performing abhisheka before a linga would have done so in a sanctum, thick with this sacred perfume, the aroma itself an integral part of the ceremony. By controlling the harvest and trade of this mystical resource, Champa dealt not just in perfume, but in a key ingredient for accessing the divine. Their ships also carried silks, likely traded from the interior, and spices like cardamom and pepper, which held both culinary and medicinal prestige. But the trade network was a two-way street of ideas. Cham merchants and sailors were the era's information brokers. A ship carrying eaglewood to China might return with new astronomical charts or metallurgical techniques. A vessel bound for Java could carry not just goods, but the latest devotional hymns or architectural concepts. These travelers were inadvertent carriers of mystical technologies, facilitating a silent, continent-wide dialogue on sacred geometry, temple construction, and ritual practice. The exchange was tangible in the rituals themselves. Consider the materials they prized. Gold mined from the inland rivers was more than currency. It symbolized the sun, immortality, and the incorruptible nature of the divine. Temple statues were gilded, and ritual objects were crafted from it, physically manifesting celestial light within the dark sanctum. Camphor, another aromatic resin, was used for its purifying, clarifying scent and its bright white crystals, which symbolized purity and were used in medicinal and spiritual preparations. This points to a profound material spirituality. For the Cham, the physical and spiritual worlds were not separate realms. A piece of fragrant eaglewood was a physical object with economic value, a chemical compound that produced a sensory experience, and a spiritual tool that could open a door to the gods. Commerce and sacrament were woven from the same thread. The wealth gained from trading these sacred substances funded the construction of the temples that used them, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of material and spiritual power. The kingdom's economy was, in a very real sense, an alchemical operation, transforming the fruits of the earth and sea into both temporal wealth and eternal grace. For over 1,000 years, the struggle between Champa and its northern neighbor was far more than a series of battles over territory. It was a slow, grinding collision between two entirely different visions of reality. To the north lay the Vietnamese kingdom of Dai Viet, a society deeply shaped by the Sinitic world. Their power was rooted in the fertile Red River Delta, an agrarian civilization modeled on Chinese Confucian principles. Here, order came from a centralized, bureaucratic state, a strict social hierarchy, and a profound reverence for ancestors. The emperor ruled with the mandate of heaven, a concept where political legitimacy was tied to moral virtue and the harmonious functioning of the natural world. Their sacred landscape was one of village guardian spirits and ancestral altars, a spiritual system focused on lineage and the stability of the rice paddy. South of the cloud-shrouded Annamite Mountains lay Champa, a universe oriented toward the open sea. Its power was commercial and cosmic, its kings deriving authority not from a celestial bureaucracy, but from a direct, personal union with the god Shiva. Their world was built on sacred mountains of brick, aligned with stars and energized by the rhythmic pulse of the Ganang drum. Where Daiviet saw a hierarchical human society mirroring heaven, Champa saw a cosmos where the king could become a vessel for the divine itself. The Vietnamese chronicles, like the complete annals of Dai Viet, reveal how they perceived this difference. To the Confucian scholars recording these histories, Cham's spirituality was often framed as potent, but dangerous magic. They did not dismiss it. They documented it with a mix of awe and suspicion, describing Cham kings who could command storms or use mystical arts in battle. A Cham tower was not just an enemy fortress. It was a node of alien spiritual power that needed to be understood and, ultimately, neutralized. The long southward march of the Vietnamese, known as Nam Tine, was therefore a process of imposing one cosmological grid upon another. When Vietnamese settlers moved into former Cham lands, they did not simply erase the spiritual landscape. They engaged in a complex act of spiritual assimilation. They recognized the power in the places the Cham had consecrated. A fierce Cham goddess like Po Nagar was too potent to destroy, so she was translated. She became Thien Hoa Na, a mother goddess incorporated into the Vietnamese pantheon. Her temples still visited, her stories retold with a new cultural inflection. The very earth that had been charged with Cham ritual was now seen as sacred under a different name. This absorption meant the old cosmic anchors were not destroyed, they were repurposed. The Vietnamese built their own villages and communal houses, their own altars to ancestors and local spirits, right alongside or even incorporating the physical remnants of Cham towers. The spiritual energy of the land, first channeled by Cham priests for a maritime kingdom, was now harnessed by Vietnamese farmers for the fertility of their fields and the protection of their families. The final military conquests were just the political punctuation marks in this centuries-long cultural dialogue. The Cham vision of a king as a living god, ruling from a Axis Mundi temple, could not withstand the relentless, demographic pressure of the Vietnamese agrarian model. Yet, in a profound testament to its resilience, the underlying spiritual current of that vision never fully disappeared. It seeped into the bedrock of local belief, creating a layered sacred geography where the whispers of Shiva and the chants of ancestors now coexist in the same soil. A conquered kingdom's gods do not simply vanish, they are often invited to stay. The spiritual legacy of Champa did not end with the fall of its last capital. It underwent a profound and esoteric metamorphosis, weaving itself into the very fabric of Vietnamese folk belief. This is a story of assimilation and syncretism, where the sacred beings of a defeated empire were recognized as too powerful to discard, and instead were given new names and roles within the conqueror's own spiritual universe. The Vietnamese pantheon of Th-7N, a vast and layered world of spirits governing everything from rivers to villages, opened its doors to these ancient forces. The most striking example is the goddess Po Nagar. To the Cham, she was the mother of the kingdom, a fierce protectress. To the Vietnamese who settled her lands, she became Thien Hoa Na, a benevolent mother goddess and patroness of the land. Her temple at Nha Trang was never destroyed, it was simply rededicated. For centuries, Vietnamese pilgrims have climbed the same stone steps the Cham once used, leaving offerings of fruit and flowers, lighting incense, and praying to the same divine presence, now understood through a different cultural lens. The same process happened with mountain spirits and local guardian deities. A rugged peak once sacred to a Cham earth spirit might become the home of a Vietnamese mountain god, its power acknowledged and incorporated into the local geomantic landscape. This was not an act of erasure, but of spiritual diplomacy. By honoring these entities, the new settlers sought to appease the genius loci, the spirit of the place, ensuring harmony and prosperity in their new home. It was an implicit admission that the land itself remembered its old guardians. This mystical integration reaches its most dynamic expression in the practice of Laren Distrokletter 1 the intricate ritual of spirit mediumship central to Vietnamese folk religion, particularly in the mother goddess religion, Dao Mao. During these vibrant musical ceremonies, a medium enters a trance state, becoming a vessel for various spirits to descend and interact with the community. Among the pantheon of deities that may be invoked are spirits of historical figures, national heroes, and, significantly, Cham spirits. In certain regions, a medium might suddenly embody the presence of a Cham king or a Cham princess, their posture, speech, and demeanor shifting to reflect this ancient identity. The spirit, speaking through the medium, might offer blessings, diagnose illnesses, or give advice. Its power acknowledged and utilized by a Vietnamese congregation. This is a breathtaking act of esoteric continuity. The spiritual energy and identity of the Cham, their very presence, is not locked in a history book. It is a living, accessible force that can be summoned through ritual. It suggests that the conquest was only political, not spiritual. The mystical imprint of the Cham kingdom was so deep that it could not be removed, only transmuted. The drums that once pulsed in Cham temple courtyards now find an echo in the ceremonial music of a Laren Distrokletter 1 ritual, both serving the same purpose, to bridge the world of the seen and the unseen. So the question shifts from what was lost to what was preserved in a different form. The soul of Champa did not die, it went underground, into the rich soil of folk memory and practice, resurfacing whenever a medium chants an old prayer or a villager lights incense before a statue whose original name they might not even know. This is the ultimate testament to a civilization's spiritual power, when even those who overcame it feel compelled to keep its gods alive. Stone holds a memory of devotion. Within the cool, dark sanctums of the temples and the open courtyards, the Cham sculptors performed a sacred act of translation. They took the intangible essence of a god, a concept of cosmic power, and gave it a local habitation and a name in sandstone. The resulting statues were far more than decorative art. They were concentrated nodes of spiritual energy, designed to make the unimaginable present. Look at the face of a Cham Shiva. Unlike the dramatic, multi-armed depictions found in some Indian traditions, the Cham Shiva often possesses a profound, serene stillness. His eyes are half closed in meditation, his lips hinting at a gentle, knowing smile. This is not a god of distant fury, but of intimate, inner peace, the still center of the universe made visible. Similarly, a statue of Vishnu the Preserver radiates a calm, benevolent authority, often holding the symbolic discus and conch shell. And then there is Ganesha, the elephant-headed remover of obstacles, his portly, childlike form carved with a charming simplicity that invites approachability alongside reverence. Each deity's form is a precise set of visual codes, an anatomy of the divine meant to be read and felt by the devotee. But perhaps the most dynamic expression is the dancing Shiva, Nataraja. Captured in a whirl of motion, one leg raised, arms splayed, he dances within a circle of flames, representing the endless cycle of creation and destruction. In a Cham depiction, this cosmic dance feels both monumental and graceful, a frozen moment of divine energy that seems to make the very stone vibrate. Alongside these gods, the goddesses embody a different power. Whether as the warrior Durga or the maternal Uma, their figures are carved with a gentle, rounded grace, their expressions holding a compassionate strength, a divine assurance that watches over the kingdom. The creation of such an image was itself a ritual. A sculptor was not just an artisan, he was a participant in a spiritual technology. The goal was to craft a form so perfect, so infused with intention, that it could become a suitable vessel. This leads to the core concept of prana, the breath of life, the vital force that animates all existence. In the consecration ceremony for a new statue, known as the prana pratishtha. Priests performed elaborate rites to invite the deity's essence to descend and reside within the stone. Through precise mantras, offerings, and rituals, the statue was transformed from a beautiful object into a murti, a literal embodiment of the divine. The eyes of the statue were often the last to be ceremonially opened, marking the moment the deity awakened within its new home. From that point on, the sculpture was treated as the living god. It was bathed, dressed in silks and jewels, offered food, and honored with light and song. For a devotee, standing before the murti was not looking at a symbol of Shiva, it was being in the presence of Shiva. The serene face became a focal point for meditation, a mirror reflecting the inner stillness the devotee sought to cultivate. The dynamic posture of the dancing Shiva became a lesson in the nature of reality itself. These sculptures were the essential tools of worship, the tangible points of contact where the human and the divine could meet. The stone, once inert, now pulsed with prana, a sacred battery of presence that made the temple's promise real. When the morning sun slanted through a temple doorway to fall upon the face of a goddess, it was not illuminating art, it was greeting a resident. The stone faces of the gods were nourished by a living, flowing element. For the Cham, water was never just a practical resource. It was the visible expression of a divine current that sustained both the kingdom and the cosmos. Their entire civilization was an intricate dialogue with this element, a sacred hydrology where engineering and spirituality flowed from the same source. To build their world, they first had to master water's physical path. The coastal plains they inhabited were not naturally generous. They were lands of intense monsoon rains followed by long dry seasons. To create the stable rice agriculture that supported their cities and temples, the Cham became masters of hydraulic engineering. They constructed sophisticated systems of reservoirs, known as bare, to capture and store monsoon rainwater. They dug extensive networks of canals and channels to distribute this life-giving resource to paddas across the dry months. At sites like my son, archaeologists have discovered deep, brick-lined wells, engineered to tap into the groundwater with remarkable precision. This was not merely civil engineering, it was an act of sacred geometry, shaping the land's veins to mirror the order they believed governed the universe. Every controlled drop of water represented a pact with the natural world, a demonstration of the king's power to bring harmony from chaos. The spiritual dimension of this relationship ran even deeper. In the Cham worldview, water was the primordial substance, the apa, from which all creation emerged. It was the essential medium of purity. Just as the universe was born from a cosmic ocean, so too did every ritual require the cleansing flow of water to renew its sacred power. This is why rivers were not just geographical features, they were goddesses. The Thurbon River flowing near my son was likely seen as a divine entity, her waters considered sanctified, the only fit substance for the most important temple rituals. The ritual ablution, the abhisheka of the linga with water, milk, and honey, was a reenactment of this cosmic principle. Each pouring was a symbolic return to the source, a washing away of impurity and a rebirth of divine presence. The hydraulic systems were, therefore, extensions of the temple itself. Canals were not just irrigation ditches, they were ceremonial pathways, channeling spiritually charged water from sacred reservoirs to the temple moats and tanks used for priestly purification before rituals. Managing this entire cycle was a core duty of kingship. A king proved his divine mandate not only by winning battles, but by ensuring the canals flowed and the reservoirs were full. His legitimacy was measured in the height of the rice stalks and the clarity of the temple's ritual water. When a community gathered to clean a communal reservoir at the start of the planting season, they were performing a civic duty with profound spiritual weight, maintaining the material and mystical health of the kingdom in one act. This union of the practical and the profound created a resilient worldview. The well at a temple complex was not just a hole in the ground, it was a portal to the subterranean sacred, a point where the community could draw up the very essence of purity. The rain that filled the bare was a blessing from the heavens, collected and redistributed as a sacrament for the land. In this system, every farmer tending a water gate and every priest pouring a libation were participating in the same eternal cycle, sustaining a civilization where water was the visible thread connecting the rice paddy to the temple tower, and the human realm to the divine. That mastery of water and stone relied on a third, more elusive element. The very bricks that form the towers of my sun hold a secret that modern science still struggles to fully decode. This is not merely an ancient building technique. It is a potential lost esoteric science, a form of material alchemy where the Cham transformed base earth into a sacred, eternal substance. The mystery is tangible. Run your hand along the side of a 1,500-year-old Cham tower. The surface is not a patchwork of individual bricks held by thick mortar lines. Instead, the bricks are fitted together with such impossible precision that the joints are virtually invisible. In many places, you cannot slide a blade of grass between them. They are not just stacked, they are fused, forming a surface so seamless it appears to be a single molded mass of terracotta. How was this achieved? The prevailing theory points to a kind of sacred chemistry. Researchers believe the builders used an organic adhesive, a glue made from the resin of local trees, perhaps mixed with clay slurry and other plant extracts. This sticky paste would have been applied to each brick before it was fired. Then, in the kiln, under intense and carefully controlled heat, a remarkable transformation occurred. The organic glue would have carbonized and vitrified, essentially melting and fusing the surfaces of the bricks together into a monolithic whole. The brick itself was also a product of profound knowledge. The clay was likely sourced from specific local deposits and mixed with precise additives, perhaps sand or rice husk ash, to control shrinkage and increase strength. The firing process itself, the tapas or heat, was the crucial transformative fire. It was not a simple bonfire, but a sustained, high-temperature kiln environment, possibly reaching over 1,000 degrees Celsius, maintained for days. This was the alchemical moment, where earth, through the discipline of fire, was transmuted into something new, something that could defy centuries of monsoons and jungle growth. To view this only as advanced engineering misses the spiritual dimension. In the Cham worldview, this process mirrored the cosmic cycle of creation and destruction. The raw clay was the unformed earth, Prakriti. The sacred fire, tapas, represents both physical heat and the spiritual heat of austerity and concentration. Through this fiery ordeal, the mundane material was purified and reborn as a sacred material, worthy of housing the gods. This knowledge was likely a closely guarded secret, held by specialized priestly guilds or families of master builders. These artisans were not just laborers, they were ritual technicians. The act of constructing a temple, from selecting the clay to lighting the kiln, would have been surrounded by ceremony, mantras, and strict taboos. Each brick, before being placed, was not just a building block. It was a consecrated object. Its creation, a miniature rehearsal of the cosmic order the temple itself was meant to embody. The loss of this specific formula is a quiet tragedy. When the last master of this brick alchemy passed away without an heir, a direct line to a tangible magic was severed. We can analyze the bricks in laboratories. We can theorize about tree resins, but we cannot fully replicate the exact ritual and technical synthesis that produced these eternal stones. The towers stand, therefore, not only as monuments to faith, but as permanent puzzles. Their very substance a silent testament to a science that understood how to make Earth dream of eternity. The seamless fusion of brick and belief reached its ultimate expression in the person of the king himself. In the sophisticated state theology of Champa, the ruler was far more than a political leader. He was a living axis mundi, the human pivot upon which the entire cosmic and social order turned. This concept, closely akin to the Khmer Devaraja or God-King cult, positioned the Cham monarch as the earthly embodiment of a deity, most often the great god Shiva. His physical body was understood to be a temporary vessel for a divine essence, making his every action, from leading an army to conducting a ceremony, a sacred act that sustained the universe of his kingdom. This was not mere propaganda. It was a foundational metaphysical truth that bound every subject to a shared spiritual destiny. The king's primary duty was to maintain the harmony between the human realm and the divine through an unbroken cycle of perfect rituals. His legitimacy flowed not from birthright alone, but from his demonstrated capacity to channel celestial power. The most critical moment in this sacred contract was the royal consecration, the Abhiska. This was not a simple coronation, it was a ritual rebirth. Imagine a ceremony of immense scale, held within a consecrated temple complex. The future king, purified through days of fasting and meditation, would be seated upon a throne that symbolized Mount Meru. Senior Brahmin priests, keepers of the Vedic formulas, would then begin the anointing. Using golden vessels, they would pour a series of sacred liquids over the ruler's head, waters collected from holy rivers, mixed with milk, yogurt, ghee, and honey. Each libation carried profound symbolism, but the collective act reenacted the most pivotal moment in Hindu cosmology, the churning of the ocean of milk. In that myth, gods and demons churn the primordial sea to extract the nectar of immortality. Here, the anointing waters represented that very nectar, the Amrita. By bathing the king in it, the priests were not just blessing a man, they were performing a cosmic transfusion, infusing his mortal form with immortal, sovereign power. He emerged from the ritual drenched and transformed, no longer merely a son of his father, but a Divaraja, a god king, a living link between his people and the source of all creation. From that moment forward, the kingdom's stability was believed to depend entirely on the king's spiritual merit and the precision of his ritual performance. A successful harvest, a victory in battle, even the timely arrival of the monsoon rains were seen as direct reflections of the king's maintained harmony with the gods. Conversely, drought, disease, or military defeat were ominous signs that this link had frayed, that the king's tapas, or spiritual heat, had cooled. This wove politics and metaphysics into an inseparable whole. A court intrigue was not just a struggle for power, it was a disturbance in the sacred order. Building a new temple was the highest act of statecraft, a permanent battery for spiritual energy. The king's daily life was a liturgy, his palace a temple, his commands an extension of divine will. This theology solved the problem of central authority in a geographically dispersed kingdom of city-states. Loyalty was not just to a man or a family, but to the divine principle he incarnated. To rebel against the god king was to rebel against the structure of reality itself, to risk plunging the world back into chaos. It was a breathtakingly potent idea, one that turned a kingdom into a living, breathing mandala with a man-god at its still, sacred center. What happens then when that center cannot hold, when the rituals are interrupted, and the divine current believed to flow through the king is perceived to have ceased? The entire metaphysical architecture of the state begins to tremble, leaving its physical monuments to stand as silent, bewildered witnesses. The precision of their rituals extended to the very measurement of time itself. For the Cham, a calendar was far more than a tool for tracking seasons. It was a sacred map of the cosmos, a divine schedule that dictated when heaven and earth were in optimal alignment. Their system was a sophisticated fusion, blending the ancient Saka-era Hindu lunar solar calendar with their own deep observations of the local environment. This created a unique temporal rhythm that governed everything from the planting of rice to the coronation of a king. At its heart was a complex dance between the moon and the sun. Months were primarily lunar, beginning with each new moon. But to keep this lunar year in sync with the solar agricultural cycle, an extra month was intercalated, or added, at precise intervals. This ensured that major festivals, which often marked agricultural milestones, would always fall in the correct season, but the calculations went even deeper. Each day, each hour, was imbued with specific qualities derived from Hindu astrology, or Jyotisha. The positions of the planets, particularly the moon and the sun, and the constellations of the zodiac were meticulously charted by court astrologers. No significant event was left to chance. The ground breaking for a new temple, the date for a royal Abhyska ceremony, even the moment to launch a military campaign. All were determined only after consulting these celestial charts. The goal was to act under an auspicious muhurta, a window of time when the cosmic energies were most favorable, thereby guaranteeing the success and longevity of the endeavor. This belief in celestial timing is etched into the stones of their temples. While the alignments are subtle and still being studied, many scholars propose that the primary axes of major towers were deliberately oriented. A central doorway might be positioned so that the rays of the rising sun on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, would pierce the dark interior sanctum and illuminate the sacred linga within. This annual event would have been a powerful, visible confirmation of the cosmic contract, a moment when the sun god Surya himself seemed to anoint the deity and, by extension, the king. The most important Cham festival, Kate, which we discussed, is still celebrated according to this ancient calendar, falling in the 7th month, a time linked to the end of the rainy season and the harvest. This reveals a worldview of profound interconnection. Human events were not random occurrences in a neutral universe. They were notes in a grand celestial symphony. By synchronizing their rituals with the movements of the planets and stars, the Cham were actively participating in the maintenance of cosmic order. They were not passive subjects of time. They were its choreographers, using astrological knowledge to step into the flow of destiny at the most potent moments. This meticulous synchronization of human action with celestial cycles is a cornerstone of esoteric traditions worldwide, from the stone circles of Europe to the ceremonial cities of the Maya. It reflects a universal understanding that to harness true power, one must first learn to tell time by the clock of the gods. The silent stones speak only in fragments, a stark reminder of a far greater silence. The true tragedy of Champa is not merely the fall of its towers, but the burning of its libraries. For every royal inscription carved in enduring sandstone, there were thousands of texts written on fragile, perishable palm leaves. These were the kingdom's living memory, its breath and its intellect, recorded in libraries that have now vanished from the earth. Imagine the scope of what was lost. Not just dry chronicles, but the complete liturgical manuals for the priests, detailing every precise gesture, every chant, and every ingredient for the sacred rituals that sustain the cosmos. Volumes of epic poetry would have told the stories of gods and heroes in the old Cham language, weaving a national mythology. There would have been legal codes, treatises on statecraft, and complex medical texts blending herbal lore with spiritual healing. Most tantalizing of all would have been the astrological and cosmological works, the detailed maps of the stars that guided temple alignments and royal consecrations. This was a sophisticated intellectual tradition, a whole world of thought refined over a millennium, and it is almost entirely gone. The agents of this loss were relentless. The tropical climate itself is an enemy to organic material, with humidity and insects devouring palm leaves within centuries, if not meticulously preserved. But the greater destroyers were war and conquest. When Vietnamese armies sacked Cham capitals like Vijaya, the palaces and temple libraries, repositories of a rival's spiritual power, would have been prime targets for destruction. A captured city's knowledge was often seen as part of its strength, and burning its books was a symbolic and practical act of erasure. Fire would have been the final fate for most of this written heritage, leaving behind only the cryptic, abbreviated hints we find on stone. What esoteric knowledge turned to ash in those fires? Perhaps there were advanced treatises on sacred geometry, explaining the precise vibrational principles behind their seamless brickwork. There might have been detailed commentaries on the relationship between specific planetary alignments and the flow of spiritual energy, or guides to meditation techniques used by ascetics to commune with Shiva. The loss makes Champa a true lost kingdom of the mind, its inner life shrouded in a mystery far deeper than the jungle that reclaimed its cities. Yet, whispers remain. A handful of palm leaf manuscripts did survive, often by chance, discovered in forgotten corners or preserved by later communities. These fragments, along with the oral traditions meticulously kept by modern Cham Paise priests, are like finding a single page from a burned encyclopedia. The priests still chant hymns in Old Cham during ceremonies, their words passed down through generations by memory alone, a direct sonic thread to the past. These chants are not just prayers, they are living libraries of phonetics and theology. Furthermore, some knowledge was absorbed and transformed. Scholars suspect that elements of Cham medicine and astrology filtered into the folk practices of central Vietnam, their origins forgotten but their utility remembered. The goddess Po Nagar's survival is the ultimate example of a spiritual text rewritten not on palm leaves, but on the human heart. Still, we are left with a haunting void. We can admire the architecture, but we cannot read the builder's full philosophy. We can see the ritual, but we have lost the detailed commentary that explained its deepest meanings. This absence forces us to wonder what dimensions of their world we are forever blind to. What profound understanding of the link between humanity and the cosmos was articulated in those vanished libraries, only to be dissolved into the humid air, leaving behind silent towers that keep their last secrets locked in brick and stone. The silent towers waited in the jungle for a new kind of priest to arrive. For centuries, the legacy of Champa was known only through the hostile chronicles of its neighbors and the fading memories of its people, a ghost story told in stone. Its modern resurrection began not with kings, but with scholars carrying notebooks and measuring tapes. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, French archaeologists of the École Française d'Extrême Orient embarked on a systematic mission to locate, clear, and document the lost civilization. Leading this effort was Henry Parmentier, a man whose name is now inseparable from Cham studies. Arriving in Vietnam in the early 1900s, Parmentier and his teams faced a monumental task. The sites were not picturesque ruins, they were being actively consumed. At My Son, the brick towers were so entangled in roots and vines that they appeared to be strange geological formations, part of the mountain itself. The work was brutally physical, a battle against the jungle's relentless reclamation. Teams had to clear tons of vegetation and earth, often by hand, carefully stabilizing structures on the verge of collapse. But Parmentier's genius was in seeing order in the chaos. He didn't just clear temples, he began the first scientific classification of Cham art and architecture. He meticulously cataloged statues, photographed every carving, and grouped the sites into distinct stylistic periods. He recognized that the art evolved over time, from the more robust, square forms of the early centuries to the slender, elegant towers of later periods. This was the foundational work, the first real map of a lost kingdom's aesthetic soul. The deciphering of the inscriptions provided the timeline. Epigraphists, working in tandem with archaeologists, slowly unlocked the Sanskrit and Old Cham texts on the steles. Each translated word was a recovered memory, turning a stylistic sequence into a dynastic history. They could now attach names like Indravarman III or Jaya Simhavarman to specific temples and statues, weaving the bare chronology of kings into the physical landscape. The 20th century brought both revelation and profound loss. Mid-century excavations at Tra Kiu, the site of the ancient capital Simhapura, unearthed stunning narrative friezes depicting scenes from the Ramayana epic, proof of the deep penetration of Indian mythology into Cham court life. Later at Dong Duong, the discovery of a major Buddhist monastic complex revealed a vibrant period of Mahayana Buddhist practice, showing the kingdom's religious diversity. But this race against time took on a horrifying new dimension during the Vietnam War. The secluded valley of My Son, once a sacred sanctuary, found itself in a strategic corridor. The complex suffered devastating aerial bombardment. Several of its exquisite towers, which had stood for a millennium, were reduced to rubble in moments. The scars are still visible today, with piles of brick carefully sorted by conservators, a silent testament to the fragility of heritage in conflict. This tragedy injected a desperate urgency into the archaeological mission. It was no longer just about discovery, it was about salvation. In the late 20th and 21st centuries, international teams, often working with Vietnamese experts, have employed new technologies to see what the jungle still hides. Ground-penetrating radar has mapped buried foundations at sites like Hankoe, revealing the outlines of entire urban plans beneath the soil. LiDAR, which uses laser pulses from aircraft to strip away the forest canopy digitally, has identified previously unknown temple mounds and canal networks in remote areas, suggesting the civilization was even more extensive than once thought. Conservation science has become a central focus. The invisible glue that binds the bricks is now analyzed in laboratories, with chemists trying to reverse engineer the ancient formula to better preserve the standing structures. Three-dimensional scanning creates perfect digital archives of every carving, a backup copy in case of further damage. Each season of digging is now framed by a sobering question: what can we learn before it is gone forever? Archaeology here is a dialogue between patience and peril, a slow, careful unearthing of a legacy that remains on a knife's edge between being remembered and being erased completely by time, climate, and the unpredictable tides of history. This drive to map the cosmos in stone is a story told across the ancient world. The Cham vision of their temples as cosmic mountains finds a breathtaking echo in the jungles of Cambodia. At Angkor Wat, the Khmer Empire constructed the world's largest religious monument, a staggering representation of Mount Meru surrounded by concentric moats symbolizing the cosmic oceans. Both empires, influenced by the same Hindu cosmology, used architecture as a divine technology to stabilize reality and legitimize the god-king. Yet, while Angkor's scale is monumental, Champa's towers achieve a different kind of power through their impossible brickwork and intimate, secluded placement within natural mandalas of mountains. Across the sea in Java, the Buddhist monument of Borobudur presents another parallel. This massive, stepped pyramid is a three-dimensional guide to enlightenment, a path pilgrims walk while ascending through carved narratives toward the formless void of nirvana at its summit. Like the Cham Towers, it is a physical map of a spiritual journey, a machine for transformation built with precise astronomical alignments. These are not coincidences, but independent expressions of a shared esoteric understanding, the belief that sacred geometry can shape consciousness and align human destiny with celestial order. The mystery of their seamless brickwork also resonates in distant, unexpected corners of the globe. In the Scottish Highlands, Iron Age hill forts like Po Nagar exhibit sections of vitrified stone, where the rock has been fused into a glassy slag by intense, deliberate heat. In Peru, the Inca crafted walls of polygonal stones so perfectly fitted that, like Cham brickwork, not a blade of grass can pass between them, yet they used no mortar. These scattered examples, from Vietnam to the Andes, hint at a tantalizing possibility: isolated pockets of a forgotten material science. Were these techniques the results of local genius solving similar problems, or do they point to fragments of a much older, now lost global understanding of geomancy and stone alchemy? The common thread is the use of transformative fire or precise, almost organic, fitting to create structures of supernatural endurance, as if the builders sought to make their work not just permanent, but literally reborn through a purifying ordeal, turning earthly material into something approaching the immortal. On a philosophical level, the spiritual synthesis of Champa mirrors other great syncretic traditions that sought hidden unity. Their blending of indigenous earth worship with the structured pantheon of Hinduism recalls the spiritual currents of Gnosticism in the ancient Mediterranean world. The Gnostics sought a secret knowledge, or gnosis, to transcend the material world and reunite with a divine source, often blending Christian, Jewish, and Platonic ideas into new mystical systems. Similarly, the Cham took the exoteric structures of Indian religion and infused them with an esoteric, local understanding of the land's spirit, creating a unique path to the divine that was both universal and intimately local. This is akin to the principles of Hermeticism, the philosophical tradition based on the writings of Hermes Trismegistus, which proclaimed the principle, as above, so below. The Cham lived this principle, constructing their microcosmic temple mountains to reflect the macrocosm of the stars, and viewing their king as the pivotal link between the two realms. Their entire civilization can be seen as a grand hermetic experiment, an attempt to manifest celestial harmony on Earth through ritual, art, and sacred engineering. Viewing Champa through this wider lens changes everything. It moves the kingdom from being a curious historical footnote to an active participant in humanity's most profound and perennial quest. Across continents and eras, our ancestors looked at the same stars, felt the same pull of the sacred in certain landscapes, and struggled to articulate the same ineffable truths about the nature of reality. They used the tools they had, brick and stone, mantra and mudra, to build bridges to that understanding. The Cham, with their star-aligned towers and fire-fused bricks, were not an isolated anomaly. They were speaking a dialect of a universal language, one also spoken by the builders of Angkor, the masons of Cusco, and the mystics of Alexandria. Their story is a powerful reminder that the drive to decode the hidden architecture of the universe, to find our place within its grand design, is perhaps the oldest and most human mystery of all. What they built was not just a kingdom, but a lasting question etched in brick. How do we touch the infinite? Something profound still hums within those ancient stones. Today, the weathered towers of my son and Po Nagar are no longer just destinations for historians or the devout of a single tradition. They have become powerful magnets for a global community of spiritual seekers. A new kind of pilgrim now walks the sacred paths, one carrying a yoga mat or a meditation cushion, drawn not by a specific doctrine, but by a palpable, almost electrical feeling they describe as a vortex of energy. This modern fascination frames the Cham temples not merely as archaeological wonders, but as active nodes in a planetary grid of power, ancient machines built to amplify consciousness that are still switched on. The language used is that of ley lines, earth chakras, and energy vortexes, concepts from contemporary metaphysical thought that find a surprising home in these old ruins. Visitors speak in quiet, earnest tones about feeling a deep, resonant peace within the temple enclosures, a tingling sensation along the skin, or a sudden clarity of mind that they attribute to the site's unique vibrational field. For them, the precise alignment of the towers, their enduring presence, and their intentional placement within natural amphitheaters of mountains are not accidents of history. They are evidence of a sophisticated ancient science of sacred geography. This perspective sees the builders not just as worshippers, but as geomancy engineers, consciously constructing their temples at powerful intersections of the Earth's own energy lines to facilitate connection with higher states of being. A yoga practitioner might unroll her mat at dawn in the courtyard of Po Nagar, seeking to align her own body's energy centers with the perceived vortex of the site. A meditator might sit for hours in the ruined sanctum of a My Sun tower, not praying to Shiva in a traditional sense, but using the concentrated silence of the space as a catalyst for inner journeying. They are, in their own way, engaging in a form of ritual just as intentional as the ancient Abhisheka. The offering is their focused attention, the sacred liquid is their breath, and the desired communion is a personal experience of transcendence. This phenomenon is a breathtaking modern reinterpretation of the Cham's own cosmic intent, where the ancient kings sought to align the macrocosm of the stars with the microcosm of the kingdom. These modern seekers are aligning the macrocosm of the site's energy with the microcosm of their own inner landscape. The bridge between ancient and modern perception is built on a shared, intuitive recognition that some places simply feel different. The Cham explain that feeling through the presence of the gods and the precision of ritual. The modern seeker might explain it through frequencies and bioenergy, yet both are responding to the same essential truth, that this land was consecrated by over 1,000 years of concentrated human devotion and architectural genius, creating an imprint that sensitive individuals can still feel. This is not a rejection of historical understanding, but a layering of new meaning upon it. The temples become palimpsests of the sacred, where Sanskrit inscriptions coexist with the silent prayers of a visiting Reiki master. It proves the sites are not dead, but dynamically alive, capable of inspiring awe and transformation across centuries and cultures. The ancient Cham built these towers to be bridges between worlds, and in a way they never could have imagined, their stone bridges are still carrying travelers across the threshold of the ordinary into the realm of profound feeling. The true legacy of a civilization is measured not by its duration, but by the depth of its imprint. Champa's story is far more than a chronicle of a vanished kingdom. It is a living case study in the incredible resilience of culture and spirit. It shows us how a people can face immense pressure, see their political world transformed, and yet ensure that the core of their identity not only survives but subtly reshapes the world that absorbed it. This is not a tale of erasure, but of extraordinary dialogue, a 1,000-year conversation between indigenous genius and global ideas, between mountain and sea, and ultimately, between memory and the present moment. The proof is all around us in modern Vietnam. The graceful curves of a traditional Ao Dai dress, the sinuous lines of lacquerware art, even the iconic silhouette of the Nan La hat, all bear the faint but discernible echo of Cham aesthetic sensibility, of that love for rounded forms and organic flow seen in their sandstone dancers. The ancient temple complexes are now recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Sites, national treasures that draw visitors from across the globe, their preservation a shared priority. Most vitally, the Cham people themselves, through festivals like Kate and the unbroken chants of their priests, maintain a vibrant, living heritage. They are not relics, they are active custodians, proving that culture is a verb, a continuous act of remembering and renewing. On a deeper, esoteric level, Champa represents something profoundly rare, a complete spiritual ecosystem. It was a civilization that attempted to integrate every layer of existence into a coherent, sacred whole. At the pinnacle was the grand state theology of the God King, aligning royal power with the axis of the cosmos. Flowing from that were the temple rituals, the precise mudras of the dancers, and the astrological calculations that synchronized human time with celestial time. And at the foundation, rooted in the very soil, was the enduring folk worship of goddesses like Po Nagar, the protectress of the land. This was not a hierarchy where one form was more true than another. It was a spectrum of access points to the divine, from the highly formalized to the intimately local. They built a world where a farmer cleaning an irrigation canal was participating in the same sacred cycle as a king being anointed with holy water. This holistic vision sought a profound harmony, a conscious integration of humanity with the natural world and the cosmic order. In our modern era of fragmentation and disconnection, this ancient aspiration holds a powerful lesson. It reminds us that spirituality, community, and our relationship with the environment were once understood as inseparable threads of a single tapestry. The silent towers, then, are not tombstones. They are teachers. They teach us about adaptation, showing how a culture can bend without breaking, absorbing new influences while holding fast to its soul. They teach us about the power of sacred place, demonstrating how a location consecrated by centuries of devotion can retain its magnetic pull long after the original worshippers are gone, speaking to the human heart across all boundaries of language or belief. And perhaps most importantly, they teach us about the indelible nature of spirit. The political entity called Champa may have receded, but its spiritual current never ceased. It flowed underground into the folk rituals of Vietnamese villages, into the chants of Cham priests, and now, into the quiet awe of a modern seeker feeling a strange peace within a brick sanctum. The kingdom's final, lasting gift is this demonstration that while empires are built on sand and subject to time, the human yearning to connect with something greater, to build bridges between earth and heaven, is itself eternal. The stones of my son hold a silent, potent question for every visitor. What will you build that is worthy of lasting 1,000 years, not in brick and mortar, but in the spirit of a place and the memory of a people? From the silent brick towers of my son to the living altars of Po Nagar, the journey of Champa is a testament to an enduring truth. This was a civilization that dreamed in cosmic scales, building temples as mountains to anchor the heavens to their shores. Their kings sought to become living gods, their rituals a sacred science aligning human time with the movement of stars. And at its heart, a goddess born of the local earth became a universal mother, her worship outlasting the very empire that enshrined her. The physical kingdom succumbed to the slow tide of history, its cities fading and its libraries turning to ash. Yet its spirit refused to be erased. It flowed into the folk beliefs of the landscape, persisted in the chants of priestly lineages, and now speaks to a new generation of seekers who feel the old energy in those hallowed spaces. This is the ultimate lesson of Champa. Empires are temporal constructs of power and politics, inevitably subject to conquest and decay. But the deeper impulses that give them soul, the yearning to touch the divine, to mark the land as sacred, to find our small place within a vast and ordered cosmos, these are eternal. They transcend any single culture or creed. The Cham answered these universal calls with brick and fire, with dance and devotion, creating a legacy not of dominion, but of profound spiritual dialogue. Their story invites us to look beyond the surface of history, to listen for the whispers that linger in certain places long after the builders have departed. If you ever find yourself walking the coast of central Vietnam, stand before one of those towers, feel the sun-warmed brick, listen to the wind in the trees where once there were drums and chanting. Let the silence speak, and if this exploration of hidden history has sparked your curiosity, we would love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments below your own reflections on lost civilizations, sacred spaces, or the mysteries that endure. The conversation across time continues with